They called him a revolutionary, a soldier who rose not from the ivory towers of politics, but from the battlefields of a nation in pain. When Ibrahim Traoré seized power, he carried a promise, a vision of a Burkina Faso free from foreign control, strong in its own sovereignty, and rich in its own potential. But nearly 2 years later, a question lingers in the air like dust after an explosion. Is Traoré truly delivering? Or is his revolution at risk of becoming a dream too heavy to carry from the first days of his rule? Traoré spoke of transformation. He did not speak like the others before him, men who used borrowed words from Paris or Washington. No, his language was raw, defiant, and African to the core. He promised development, sovereignty, and a future in which Burkina Faso would no longer bow before outsiders. Promised schools, roads, hospitals. He promised to bring light where there was darkness. He promised the rise of a new Africa. But at the heart of it all, one brutal reality continues to burn: security. Because even as the president speaks of development, in the northern villages, gunfire still pierces the night. Families are forced to flee their homes. Mothers weep over children killed by insurgent bullets. Farmers abandon their land, leaving fields barren. How can a nation dream of development when its very survival is under siege? In Ouagadougou, the capital, you see signs of ambition, posters of new projects, speeches filled with confidence, words of sovereignty echoing across the city. But step outside the capital, and the story shifts. Roads become broken paths. Schools stand empty, abandoned not by neglect but by fear. Teachers cannot teach when the threat of violence lurks at the door, and so the great paradox emerges. Ibrahim Traoré has vision, but vision alone cannot shield a farmer from a bullet, nor can it stop a convoy from being ambushed. This is the struggle of his revolution: security versus development. Supporters argue that Traoré inherited a broken system, decades of weak leadership, corruption, and foreign dependency. They say no man, not even a revolutionary, can undo decades of decay in just 2 years. And they are right, but critics whisper another story. They ask, is Traoré's obsession with Pan-African rhetoric distracting him from the immediate crisis at home? Is his vision of a united Africa a dream too distant? While his own people cry out for safety today, the tension grows. On one hand, there are new initiatives, efforts to build state-owned companies, reforms to free Burkina Faso from the grip of international lenders, campaigns to inspire pride in African identity. These are bold steps. Yet, for the widow in Djibo whose husband was killed by extremists, speeches about sovereignty mean little when her children have no bread. For the displaced family sleeping in tents on the outskirts of Kaya, Pan-African unity feels like an echo of tomorrow, while their hunger is the reality of today. Traoré's defenders say he is fighting a war on two fronts, one against insurgents who seek to break his nation, and another against powerful foreign interests that want him to fail. And perhaps that is true. Perhaps his struggle is not only political, it is existential. But the question remains, how long can a nation wait for development when the fire of insecurity burns at its core? And here lies the paradox that every Burkinabe must face. Can Ibrahim Traoré truly deliver on his promises, or will his revolution collapse under the weight of its contradictions? This is not just about Burkina Faso. This is about Africa itself. Because if Traoré fails, his failure will not remain within his borders. It will echo across the continent. And if he succeeds, then perhaps a new Africa is truly possible. But tonight, in the silence of a village surrounded by armed men, success feels far away. And so we are left with a haunting question. Will Traoré's vision of development ever rise above the smoke of war? Or will his revolution be remembered not for what it built, but for what it could not protect? They called it a new dawn, a promise that Burkina Faso, long trapped in the shadows of poverty and violence, would rise. Ibrahim Traoré did not just speak of war, he spoke of rebirth. New roads, modern schools, food self-sufficiency, digital transformation, and a future where Burkinabe children would dream without fear. But the question burns. Is this dawn real, or is it just another mirage in the desert? Traoré's speeches often thunder with passion. He talks of tractors plowing the land, young men becoming engineers instead of refugees, and Africa breaking its chains to finally control its own destiny. The crowd listens, eyes shining, because hope is powerful and hope is dangerous. But let's peel away the speeches. Let's look closer. On the ground, the soil tells a different story. Entire villages remain abandoned, burned in the wake of extremist violence. Farmers who should be harvesting their crops instead flee with their families, carrying nothing but the clothes on their backs. The statistics do not lie. More than 2 million Burkinabe have been displaced internally. Children who should be in schools are now living in makeshift camps, waiting for food rations. So, here's the contradiction. How can you build a nation when your people are constantly running for their lives? Development requires stability. Roads cannot be paved when convoys are ambushed. Schools cannot open when teachers are executed in front of their students. Hospitals cannot function when entire regions fall under siege, cut off from medicine and food supplies. And yet Traoré insists progress is being made. His government boasts of agricultural projects, military-led construction efforts, and a surge in national pride. Propaganda videos show smiling workers, tractors rolling across the savannah, and new infrastructure springing up. But behind the glossy images lies a darker question. Are these projects sustainable, or are they simply stage-managed victories? Think about it. How many of these new farms will survive when extremist groups target them the moment the soldiers leave? How many schools will remain standing when they become symbols of resistance to those who thrive on chaos? It's a chilling paradox. Development, instead of shielding the people, often paints a target on their backs. But let's not dismiss everything. There are seeds of change. Some Burkinabe truly believe Traoré is carving a new path. Young volunteers join his civilian brigades, convinced they are building a new nation. Farmers in safer regions are indeed producing more. A sense of ownership, of national pride, has awakened in many hearts. The problem? Pride cannot fill an empty stomach. Patriotism cannot replace security, and so the dilemma deepens. Every bridge, every road, every school built becomes a gamble. A race against time. Will development take root before violence tears it out by the roots? Now let's ask a haunting question. Could Traoré be overreaching? History has seen this story before. Leaders who promised both the gun and the plow, both the revolution and the Renaissance, only to be swallowed by the very forces they tried to control. Ambition, when it runs ahead of reality, creates cracks. And into those cracks seeps doubt, disillusion, and eventually chaos. Because what happens when the people realize the promises are too heavy to carry? What happens when the dream collides with the nightmare of reality? Already, whispers echo in Burkina Faso streets. The roads are not safe. The markets are empty. Yet we are told to celebrate progress. These are not enemies speaking, these are ordinary citizens. And once hope begins to crumble, it is far harder to rebuild than a bridge or a school. Here's the final twist. Traoré has set himself against time itself. Every project he announces raises expectations. Every delay, every attack, every shortage becomes a sharp knife in the heart of his credibility. And in a nation that has already lived through multiple coups, the margin for failure is razor-thin. So we must ask, can he truly deliver both security and development? Or will one always devour the other? The farmers cannot wait forever. The refugees cannot live in tents forever. The soldiers cannot fight forever. Burkina Faso is caught in a dangerous balancing act, where one wrong step could topple everything, and so we end part 2 with this cliffhanger. If Traoré cannot stabilize the land he rules, then every promise of development becomes nothing more than dust in the wind. But if he can truly deliver both security and progress, then perhaps he will achieve what so many African leaders before him have failed to do. Question is, which path will history choose? From the very beginning, Ibrahim Traoré understood one brutal truth. Power in Burkina Faso is not inherited. It is seized, defended, and tested every single day. In his greatest test, delivering on promises that often sound louder than the guns still echoing across the Sahel. He spoke of new roads, new hospitals, fresh schools rising from the dust. He painted a vision where every farmer could till the land without fear, where every child could dream of a future free from hunger and war. And for a moment, people believed. But belief is fragile when gunfire doesn't stop. Let's pause for a second. Imagine being a villager in northern Burkina Faso. Your president promises development, yet you wake each morning to the sound of motorbikes racing through the bush, armed groups, not construction workers. What do you trust? The speeches or the shadows outside your door? This is the paradox Traoré faces. How do you talk about progress when survival itself is uncertain? Yes, his government has announced ambitious infrastructure programs. They've spoken of agricultural revitalization, of energy independence, of pushing foreign powers out so Burkina Faso can chart its own destiny. But here's the question. Can development exist in the middle of chaos? Can you plant seeds when your land is occupied by fighters? Can you build hospitals when doctors themselves flee to safer regions? The reality hits hard. Reports show that while projects are announced, implementation lags behind. Corruption, resource shortages, and above all, the relentless insecurity make progress painfully slow, and every delay erodes trust. Yet, here's the irony. Despite these setbacks, the cult of Traoré continues to grow. Crowds still cheer him. Supporters still hail him as the savior of Burkina Faso. Why? Because in a nation trapped between despair and defiance, sometimes the promise itself is the lifeline, but promises can turn into burdens. Each pledge becomes a weight on his shoulders, each word a reminder that the people are watching. And in Burkina Faso, watching can quickly turn into judging. Consider this: every time Traoré announces a new project, jihadist groups respond with fresh attacks, an invisible contest of credibility. He promises safety, they deliver terror. He promises development, they spread destruction. And caught in the middle, ordinary citizens who are forced to choose between hope and survival. Now ask yourself, how long can hope survive without tangible results? How long before people begin whispering, maybe he too is just another politician who spoke big but delivered little? The clock is ticking. Development requires stability, stability requires security, and security requires more than guns. It requires trust, governance, and a vision beyond war. Does Traoré have that vision? Yes. But does he have the machinery to make it real? That is where the story trembles, and here's the uncomfortable truth no one dares to say out loud. If he fails to deliver, the same people who raised him to power could turn against him. Loyalty in Burkina Faso is conditional. It rests on bread, water, safety, and dignity. Fail at those, and the crown of hope becomes a noose of betrayal. As this battle between promises and reality rages on, one can't help but wonder, is Traoré building a nation or simply building an image? Is he genuinely laying foundations, or is this another chapter in the endless cycle of leaders who rise on words but fall on outcomes? Because history is merciless. It does not remember speeches. It remembers results, and the results are yet to come. But what if Traoré's struggle isn't only about Burkina Faso? What if the bigger game is regional, and the promises of development are tied not just to domestic survival, but to continental showdown between old empires, new powers, and the very future of Africa? They say a leader is only as strong as the results his people can see. And this is where the Traoré story becomes truly complicated. Because while speeches ignite crowds and military uniforms project strength, the question that lingers is brutally simple. Has life actually improved for the ordinary citizen of Burkina Faso? On one side of the equation, his government parades ambitious programs, calls for self-reliance, dreams of industrial projects, promises of clean water, better schools, and healthcare access. The message is clear. We will no longer beg from the West. We will build our own future. But travel beyond the capital, into the rural villages scarred by insurgency, and the reality looks very different. Roads remain unpaved. Markets stand half empty. Parents still whisper about whether their children will make it home from school safely. And for farmers, the backbone of Burkina's economy, the land itself has become a battlefield, not just for crops but for survival. So here lies the paradox of Traoré's leadership, a narrative that screams independence, but a day-to-day reality that still bleeds uncertainty. Is this just the price of breaking free from neo-colonial shackles? Or is it proof that fiery rhetoric alone cannot extinguish the flames of violence? And yet, for many citizens, the symbolism of Traoré is powerful enough to endure these hardships. His rejection of France, his fiery speeches against exploitation, his youth in defiance, these have become fuel for hope in a country starved of victories. Some argue that hope itself is a form of development, that the collective belief in a better tomorrow can push a nation forward, even when the present feels unbearable. But here's the haunting question. How long can hope last without results? When promises of progress collide with the daily fear of gunfire, which side will win, faith or frustration? This is where the story takes a dangerous turn. Because every leader who raises expectations to the sky must eventually face the ground beneath his feet. Traoré has inspired millions. But if he cannot deliver real, tangible change, then his cult of personality may become his greatest weakness. And perhaps that is the ultimate test for Burkina Faso. Not just whether Ibrahim Traoré can protect his people today, but whether he can transform their lives tomorrow. Security or development? Stability or progress? Or is this a false choice because in the end, without one, the other cannot exist? The answer may define not just the future of one man's rule, but the destiny of an entire nation. But what if the forces aligned against him, both within and beyond Burkina Faso, are too powerful to overcome? What if his vision is doomed before it even begins? That is the question we must face next.